Today's Monday. Man halt jetzt Dalet Elul. 4 days in Elul. Schön tief in Elul. Ja, das hat mir gerade nächten. There's so many things to talk about in Elul. And of course, we talk about Anila Doidi. We talk about Chodesh HaCheshbon. But one of the things which are important to talk about in Elul is tshuva. It's tshuva. And one of the things that's very, very important to talk about when you talk about tshuva is that how much emotion you have doesn't determine how good the tshuva is. In other words, even though the impression that we have, and even what's written in Sfarim, that tshuva is all about feelings, the truth is, tshuva is not about feelings. Tshuva is about actions. And if you make a small behavioral improvement, it's a much bigger tshuva than the person who cries till his kishkis go out and he stays the way he was before. This is very critical to understand. You know, sometimes too much emotion is a chesaron. Maybe not even sometimes, maybe always. Because there's, so to speak, there's a pleasure in emotion. There's a satisfaction. Oh, look, I care. It bothers me. It bothers me so much. The Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe, I heard this when I was a kid in yeshiva. That the Alter Rebbe, by the way, I oftentimes call my Talmidim kinder. They get very insulted, I call them kinder. So I just learned this morning a Mishnah. I'm learning Masechta Sukkah, and I'm learning about Simchas Beis HaShieva. Don't you say, Hayolodim shebehem, zogt Rashi, Bachurim. So there, that's a Fartek Teretz. It says in the Mishnah, Hayolodim, the kinder, the children. And Rashi says, Bachurim, young koyanim. The pratam are not negeya. So the kinder, that you're allowed to call Bacham Yeshiva kinder. I mean, in Chumash, Yitzchak Avinu was 37 years old. He's been taken to the Akedah, and he's called a Nar. You know, got it. In any case, so when we were in Yeshiva, the Mashpiyim told us that they heard from their Mashpiyim, that when the Alter Rebbe wrote the Igeres HaTshuva, there was a reason why. The reason why the Alter Rebbe wrote the Igeres HaTshuva. And the reason was because there was an attitude, there was a hashkafa that said that tshuva is such a difficult thing that nobody could do it. There was sort of a yiyush lagabe, there was a sense of achkenish tshuva. But if I don't do an aveda, it's good. If I did an aveda, to fix it. So again, this is what we heard from our mashpiyim. It's very, very possible that the Rebbe said it. I don't remember off the top of my head seeing it or hearing it in a Sicha. But the Alter Rebbe wrote the Igeres HaTshuva for the express purpose of articulating that it's not impossible. And the way he presents it right in the very, very beginning, and the emissaries that Rambam says almost the same words, that Iker HaTshuva min HaTeira hi azivas achet bilvad. Min HaTeira, Iker HaTshuva, the essence of tshuva is azivas achet, to stop doing an aveda. Now, then there's something called tshuva shleima, complete tshuva, which is about charata, which is about regret, and it involves vidoy, and it involves confession. But what's the most important thing in tshuva? The most important thing in tshuva is not how you feel about what you did, or how you feel of what you missed, of what you could have and should have done. The most important thing in tshuva is not to do it again. That's it. Iker HaTshuva, in other words, the most elementary component of tshuva is what we call Kabbalah ala haba. The most basic Indian in tshuva is how I establish myself going forward. It's not about my past. My past is shleimus hatshuva. Then there's a higher tshuva which is called tshuva ila'ah, which can reverse the past and so on. But the elementary idea of tshuva is simply to say la yoshaved la kisla. I won't do it again. And for a person to say, I won't do it again, and not do it again, is an incredible, incredible accomplishment. And the reality of tshuva, therefore, is, the reality, the practical tshuva is, metut tshuva in kleine zachen. You know, we hear such inspiring words, especially when you listen to the Rebbe. The Rebbe the Chalakus, Getlichkeit, Red. I once said to my uncle, Itche Nemen of Lagazunzan, I was in his house, and we were talking about the Fabrengenischen. So I said, Satzach gegossen Teires. He corrected me. It's Satzach gegossen Alakus. I said, it's Satzach gegossen Teire. Teire was pouring. He said, godliness was pouring. So you listen to the Rebbe talk about these and Yodim, they all sound so easy and so cosmic. But in Avodah B'Poyel, Tshuva is little things. For a person to be metaken and to be invited one midah, even in relationship with one person, is a tshuva g'doyla b'yois. It's a very big avodah. But there's two things about it. It changes a person. When a person makes little changes in their life, they change a lot. Practically, if a person has a bad habit, lamashal, you have a relationship with a certain person that every time you see him, you insult him. I mean, women have different types of insults than men, but yeah. But each gender, lefi genderisai, we have established relationships with people. And there's a person that you know, it doesn't matter why, going back many, many years, when you meet this person, there is a negative tone. And you say, you know what, may I be nice to this person. Simple thing. And you do it, it's tshuva. That's what tshuva means. That's tshuva. Why? I changed my action. I have 900 million more Avedas. I just fixed one little one. So Kedem Kol, you did tshuva in one thing. And the rikid is that when a person corrects themselves in a little way, they correct all of themselves. Which is why when it comes to tshuva, one of the most important things to remember and to know is the hisrakshus halev, the emotion of the heart, is so much less important in tshuva than the hachlata tova, than the good resolution. And the hachlata tova stays. The hachlata tova holds when we're honest with ourselves. They had a few years ago, Rabbi Meir Gerari Zal Gesund Sein, Rabbi Zalman Gerari's older son, it was interviewed, and he shared some very personal things. He said them in a tone that sounds pare, but they're very personal. He had a yechidus with the Rebbe, and he was talking to the Rebbe about the inyan of achlatas tevis, good resolutions. And good resolutions is another way of saying tshuva. The difference is, a good resolution means, it doesn't necessarily mean that before I was doing something wrong and I'm fixing it. It means that before I wasn't mahadid in this inyan, I'm going to take on a new hidur mitzvah. But it's the same principle. You're changing yourself. You're bringing onto yourself a new good regilus. It wasn't in your habit to do kach v'kach, and you're undertaking to bring onto yourself a regilus teva, a good habit. That's what you're doing. You're bringing onto yourself a good regilus, a good habit. And that's what achatos tevis are. And we all know that it says in Sfarim, and we know stories of our Rebbe, the Payil Mamish, that every Rosh Hashanah that Rabbein took on another hidden mitzvah. The Rebbe had to never look very far and wide to find ways of every Rosh Hashanah doing Mahad mitzvahs. There's a story with the Rebbe, I forgot the Prati Asipur. There was a Yid who had a relationship with the Rebbe, and the Rebbe used to do a certain thing, and then at one point the Rebbe stopped, and he was very not happy about it. And the Rebbe told him that the reason he discontinued has to do with the hachlata teva that he made that Rosh Hashanah. The Rebbe told him that this Rosh Hashanah took on a new resolution, a hidur mitzvah, and based on that hidur mitzvah, he was no longer able to continue this meaning. And he told this person, he told him that this is the reason I forgot the story. I heard the story, but I forgot the nekuda of the story. I remember, but the oirech v'roichev, the meat and potatoes, the story, what it was that the Rebbe did, and what the Rebbe discontinued doing, I forgot. But this vart that he sort of excused himself. He said to this person, usually I would do kach v'kach. This year I didn't, to you, or for you, or about you, or with you, because of hachlata teva that I took on Rosh Hashanah. So Rabbi Meir Gerari Zal Gesund Sein asked the Rebbe, how come he makes hachlatas and he doesn't keep them? And the Rebbe gave him two rules. Number one, when you make hachlata, do it right away. Never make a hachlata, I'm going to start tomorrow. Right away, immediately. And number two, I hope I'm saying it correctly, never take on a hachlata that's not realistic. Cholam nisht. Don't dream. Don't fantasize. When you make a hachlata, it has to be something that you're able to do b'peil mamish, and then you go ahead and you do it b'peil mamish. And this is critical. When you do tshuva about things that need correction, but that you could correct. And when a person successfully corrects himself in one way, even though the specific thing he's correcting is very small, he's really correcting all of himself. So I'm doing tshuva. This few minutes was a tshuva. Why? I've been talking so much about Melech Basod. And Melech Basod is gewaltig. Why? Because the Melech is Basod no matter what. The Melech is Basod kumvas, right? The Rebbe made Melech Basod unconditional. And the Rebbe adds in the Maimer, the Alter Rebbe, they found the Maimer from the Alter Rebbe, which was printed recently, where the Alter Rebbe says that the Melech doesn't only go to the Sadeh, he goes to the Midbar. He goes to the place of the Rishoyim. So the Rebbe made Melech Basada an absolute universal law. The king is in the field. Aber man darf doch etwas tun, right? Chede Shell is a Seidinus, and a time of Avoida. So I'm mentioning the Inyan HaTshuva. Okay, let's learn. This is a new Sicha. It's Shabbos Mevorchim. Now Shabbos Mevorchim El is behind us. But the next Fabrengen after this was Chayelul, and the Sichas were a little bit difficult. So we're going to learn this, okay? I mean, the Ikin is a Malendem Rebbe's Teire, with our schus, so we learned the Rebbe's Teire. Besides for the Tanya, everything we learn here now is the Rebbe's Teire. That's it, right? Except for Tanya, I mean, Tanya's Teire Shebekzav. It's like saying, oh, I'm not such a good chassid, I learn Chumash. So we learned the Rebbe's Sichas from 60 years ago. This is a Shabbos Mevorchim, it's an Elul Dika Sicha. Pashas Re'ei Kedim Le'elim B'Shaychas L'Chedishal. Pashas A is always in conjunction with Elul, and I guess I'll explain it. I've talked about this a number of times. There's a Gemara that discusses this, right? There's a famous Rambam. It's famous because the Rebbe made it famous. That going back hundreds of years, thousands of years, there were two minhagim about Kriyas HaTeirah. There were two customs about reading in the Teirah. In the time of the Go'onim, there were two drachim. Then now everybody does it the same way. One was that you finish the Torah in 3 years, and the other is that you finish the Torah every year. So the Rebbe made the Takon of Limud Rambam. That's why he made the two starting to learn a Perek Echad Layim, where you complete it in approximately 3 years, and the Shleisha Perakim Layim, where you finish it approximately every year. And the Rebbe quoted this Rambam. That's how I know this Rambam. I would never know this Rambam otherwise. Also, bringt sich in Svarim. It's not a Seid. Meves from them. So there's a custom that you have to finish the Torah either every 3 years or every year. According to the custom that you finish it every year, we finish the Torah on Simchas Torah, which is also a Chiddush. Simchas Torah is not any place in Shas. There's no Simchas Torah in the Gemara. There's no such thing. When did Simchas Torah start? And how did Simchas Torah start? And who was the first one to say Ata Areitza and to do 7 Akofis? These are all things which are a little bit obscure. You know, the Vilna Gaon writes in a Simchas Torah, you should sing and dance and celebrate the Torah, but there's no Remes for Hakofis. The Gra, only 250 years ago. The Hakofis has an earlier source, but in the Vilna Gaon Siddur, there's no Hakofis, if I'm not mistaken. I saw it years ago, I hope I'm not making a mistake. He says Mefreitzach with the Torah, but he doesn't say the Minhagim of the Hakofis. Anyway, but in order to finish the Torah, every Simchas Torah, you have to deal with the facts that you don't have the same number of Shabbos every year. First of all, some years are leap years, so you have 4 more Shabbos. Second of all, what happens if you have a Yom Tov on a Shabbos, or 2 Yom Tov on Shabbos? Right? If the first day Pesach is Shabbos, the last day Pesach is Shabbos, you lost 2 weeks. If Rosh Hashanah is Shabbos, the first day Sukkot is the Shabbos, the last day Sukkot is the Shabbos, you lost 3 more Shabbos. So there's a whole complicated system of how to work out that the Torah should always start Shabbos Bereishis, it should always finish Simchas Torah. The rules are not that complicated. One of the rules is that the Shabbos before Shavuos you read Bamidbar or Nasei. The Shabbos before Shavuos you read Bamidbar or Nasei. And the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah you read Nitzavim or Nitzavim Vayelech. In other words, the Shabbos before Rosh Hashanah is always at the Nitzavim. That's why we have in the Hayem Yem that the bracha that the Eibush the bench is Chedesh Tishrei is the bracha of Atan Nitzavim Hayem. What's the cheshbon? The cheshbon is basically that we have 2 Rosh Hashanahs. Aleph Tishrei is called Rosh Hashanah, and it says in Psukim, and it's brought in Chazal, that Shavuos is called Rosh Hashanah. You have Rosh Hashanah L'maaseh Bereitzis, and you have Rosh Hashanah L'matan Torah. The emphasis is Aleph Nisan is also called Rosh Hashanah L'mlochim, yeah, but we're not talking that Rosh Hashanah. Aleph Tishrei is Rosh Hashanah for Lishonim, and Vav Sivan or it's Shavuos, whatever Shavuos is, Man Matan Torah Seinu, is Rosh Hashanah for Torah. Twice in the Torah you have the Toy Chocho, you have the Teichecha, you have the curses, the words of rebuke, what the Torah calls Divrei Abris. And you want to read them before Shavuos, and you want to read them before Rosh Hashanah. You want to read them before the 2 Rosh Hashanah, but not Mamish Besmichas. You don't want to go from the Klolos into Yom Tov. So you have to have a Shabbos in between. So B'chukeisai is the first Teichecha, then you have Bamidbar, then you have Shavuos. Sometimes they have nothing. Tove is the Teken Teichacha. Then you have Nitzavim, and then you have Rosh Hashanah. That's one of the sets of the klolim that the Chazal were keveya. Another klal, of course, is that Devarim is always the Shabbos connected to Tisha B'Av. Shabbos Chazoin is always Devarim. Either it's Tisha B'Av itself, or it's the Shabbos before. And Vo'ez Chanan is always Nachamu. You know, this is how they were designed. And on this basis, they join certain parshas together. Vayakal and Pekudei, and Tazriim and Seder, and Achra Kadeshim, and Bar B'chuk Ketzai, and Chukas Bolach, and Matas Masei, and Nitzav and Vayelech. And so it all works out. When you have an Iber Yor, you stretch it out, right? So you'll read Tazriah separately, and Metzeder separately, and the Chveis Vasol Pesach will be Chveis Vas Pashas Metzeder. In a regular year, it'll be Pashas Tzav. However, but it all works out. Yeah, it all works out. One of the things which works out in the calendar that the Re'eh is always Elul. Re'eh is always Elul. The Rebbe spoke once that in Likutei Torah there's no section of Maimorei Elul. The Likutei Torah goes in sections. You have Maimorei Rosh Hashanah, you have Maimorei Shabbos Shuvah, you have Maimorei Yom Kippurim, you have Maimorei Chag HaSukkos. That's how it goes, yeah? There's no Maimorim for Elul. It's included with Re'eh. Pashas Re'eh has the Maimorim of Elul. Nila Deidi V'Deidi Li is in Pashas Re'eh, because evidently Re'eh is connected to Elul. Either it's B'Shabbos Mevorchim Chedesh Elul, either Re'eh is Shabbos Mevorchim, or B'Reish Chedesh Elul, or it's Takareish Chedesh itself. So the Rebbe continues. Al Pi Piskam Rabbeinu Azak. We all know what the Alter Rebbe said, and of course, I think it says Ochiv Maharil, but I forgot. It was the middle Rebbe. Whatever it is. I think I remember the Rebbe saying Durch the Mittel Rebbe, but I think in Ayayim it says the Maharil, but I don't remember. Sheshamanu Kama Pa'amim Shechazer Allah Kvei Kedushas Meri B'Chamei Mo. The Rebbe says I heard it from the Frierdiker Rebbe more than once or twice. Shetzrichim lichit mezman mendaf lebe medetzai. The Alter Rebbe said mendaf lebe. You have to live with the times. He didn't explain. So the Chassidim didn't know what it meant. So again, either it was his brother or it was his son that went into the Alter Rebbe and asked, "What does it mean with lebe medetzai?" And the Alter Rebbe said, "In Pashas Shavua." If you want to know how to live this week, look in Pashas Kiseitz. Because the chayis of this week is the Torah of this week, the Torah Shabbat Ksav this week, Pashas Kiseitz. And of course, this is why by the Rebbe there is a preoccupation with Pashas HaShavua, because the Alter Rebbe said, this is the life, this is the Kehem Chayenu, the Torah's Chayim, Chayrah B'Chayim for this week. The Torah that we read this week is the instruction for how we should live this week. And he explained in Pashas HaShavua, right? The Vart was Leben Midetzait, and the interpretation, give me 1 second. And the interpretation was, with Pashas HaShavua, I happen to carry around the Hayom Yom. So I'll look inside. Yeah, here it says, durch den Bruder Maharil, to his brother. And somebody actually corrected me once when I said to the Rebbe, I'm 99% sure that I heard from the Rebbe that the Rebbe said, through the Mittler Rebbe. Here it says his brother, the Maharil, but I'm almost positive that the Rebbe said once in the Sicha to the Mittler Rebbe, but I could, of course, be wrong. So the Rebbe says, I remove him b'mekol shekain. If this is always true, it's especially true. Sheparsha b'teira. If there's a parsha in Teira, shekedim b'fnei kol am ve'eda, that's read in front of a kila kadish b'sol, in front of the whole shul. Tomid, constantly be'esei is man in the same time. Harim kshurim is man zen. So there has to be a special connection between Pashas Re'eh and El. Now we're already holding Monday of Pashas Kiseitze, but it's nish gefährlich. Yeah, we can go back and learn a Sicha on Elul and Re'eh. Ubeniden didan. Pashas Re'eh kshura im inyane shel chedesh El. Pashas Re'eh has a special connection with the idea of El. Now I might as well share with you that there's a very interesting thing. In one of the Maimorim of the Rebbe Anil Doidi, the Rebbe has 3 Maimorim Anil Doidi which are Muga, which he edited. In one of the Maimorim Anil Doidi, which we learned here, the Rebbe makes an interesting observation. The Tzemach Tzedek made the Teira in the Likutei Torah. The Tzemach Tzedek made, not the Tzemach Tzedek had given some druk. He didn't say print it. He prepared it. The Tzemach Tzedek prepared the Maimorim that went into the Teira. Prepared means he edited them and he corrected them and he chose them and so on. And he also put them in the order that he wanted. Tzemach Tzedek chose all the Maimonim that went into the Teira, and then he chose all the Maimonim that went into the Likutei Teira. But in the Likutei Teira, there's an additional factor. Not only did he choose the Maimonim and that he prepared the Maimonim, he included his notes. In the Likutei Teira and Teira are the same sefer. Why do they have different names? Because there's a difference between them. Teira is the Maimonim of the Alter Rebbe, and it's from an earlier Tkufa. And Likutei Teira is Maimonim of the Alter Rebbe from a later Tkufa with the Tzemach Tzedek's Hagos. And the Tzemach Tzedek chose which Maimonim are going to go into B'Shalach, and which Maimonim are going to go into Pekudei. They have only 2 parshas of Shmeis in the Likutei Teira. And then which Maimonim are going to Vayikra and Tzav and Shmini and so on and so forth, and the Pesach and all the Likutei Teira. And he skipped Sheftim. There's no Likutei Teira on Sheftim. Nito. He skipped Sheftim. Nito. There's no Likutei Teira on Sheftim. Of course, to say that Bam Tzemach Tzedek is Shayach Atos, to say about the Rebbe that he made a mistake, especially such a patch, especially such a thing. The Tzemach Tzedek spent 32,000 hours. The Tzemach Tzedek, who had the mind of who knows what, spent 32,000 hours working on the Maimonim of the Alter Rebbe. One of the Tzemach Tzedek's lifetime accomplishments was that he was mevadeh, and he was menapeh, and he was mefarish the Maimonim of his Zayda. Alter Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek spent a good part of his life collecting, editing, organizing, annotating, and giving makeres, sourcing the Maimonim of his Zayda, which he had 2,000, which is an incredible piece of work. And then he chose his favorite, to put them into the Likutei Teira. He skipped Sheftim. So there's no mistakes. Why there's no Sheftim? So the Rebbe said a word. In Chedesh El, you're not allowed to mention judgment. Finished. The name of the Pasha means judgment. In Chedesh El, there's no judgment. That's what the Rebbe said. There's a place and a time for judgment. There's a place and time for judgment. In Elul, Lo Yishoma Al Picha, you don't even mention it. If it's Chedesh Elul, Sheftim Vert Nidermont, you don't even mention it. There's a concept of judgment. And since the name of the Pasha is Sheftim, so the Rebbe skipped it. So in Shul Shabbos, we have a Chaverman, a Chassidish Yergaman, who says, you know why there's no Likutei Teira in Sheftim? Because the Alter Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek, left it for the Sicha of Sheftim Tinasei, of Tafshin and Alf. But you know what? I agree. The Tzemach Tzedek, with 150, Karge 20 Judglik, when Tafreish Ches, wo hat man jetzt? 180 years ago, 70 years ago, when he printed the Likutei Teira, didn't put Sheftim, because Sheftim is waiting for the Sicha of Sheftim Tinasei. This is what he said, and it's a word from Hasidim. It's a hergish. It's not Torah Semis, but it's like a feel. But anyway, so let's keep going, yeah? Chedesh Elul hu ha-chedesh shebei erchem cheshbon ha-nefesh. The first thing about Elul is cheshbon ha-nefesh. He doesn't mention Melech Basad there, yeah? You take stock al Hashana She'ava for the last year, and of course you know how it works. That a whole Elul you're evaluating the previous year. The last 12 days in Elul, you identify that evaluation. Yom LaChodesh, every day you do an evaluation of a different month. And then the Yom Neroy, Maseres Yemei Tshuva, this is the Kabbalah Lahabo, how you plan to improve, what corrections you're going to make for the coming year. And you know, I grew up listening to this and hearing this. These are very serious things, but they're not easy. If we're honest with ourselves, Jeden Tag Machash Varachedesh, Greis Chassidim, very great Chassidim, for them this was a real thing. For us, we feel like it's so overwhelming to us, and as a result of that, we do nothing. That's why I said what I said in my introduction, that you have to understand that the only thing that matters about tshuva is that I make a change. All the feelings that make me feel frustrated and inadequate, and it's nonsense. The only thing that matters, even if my correction does not conform to the principles that are written in the holy books about how you do tshuva and elul, if I make a practical tshuva, I did tshuva. And if I'm busy with the emotions, and as a result of this I didn't make any changes, I didn't do tshuva. But in any case, Chedesh El is Chedesh, it's the month, Shabbos Erchim Cheshbon Nefesh, we make a Cheshbon HaNefesh, our Shana Shav for the year that passed. Vayedei Zeh Zeichim, and through this we merit Ksiva V'chasima Toiva L'Shana Toiva Mesukah, to be written and to sealed for a good year, L'Shana Haba, for this upcoming year. V'nimtza, in other words, Chedesh Elul, the month of Elul, Hu HaChedesh HaMekasher, it's the month that connects as Hashana She'avra Im Hashana Haba, the year that has been with the year that's coming. So we have two ideas. Elul is a coupling, yeah? It's a hook. It connects Tav Shin Pei with Tav Shin Pei Aleph, or Tav Shin Aleph Pei. And each one learns from the other. Just like for this coming year. We do the work that we must do in Elul. We merit to be given good, which is absolute, physically and spiritually. If the end of the year comes and I do tshuva in Elul, what happens, what I do in the month of Elul influences that the year becomes retroactively, becomes backwards, taif, good. Now, of course, this doesn't make any sense. What happened yesterday happened yesterday. What's going to happen tomorrow hasn't happened yet. So I can do something today to prepare for tomorrow. But what's happened yesterday has already happened. I always tell you, this isn't the Gemara, that there's two expressions. Vayehi and Vahoya. Vayehi means it was. Vahoya means it will be. So the Gemara says Vayehi is Lashon Tzad. What was is a Lashon of Tzad, pain. Vahoya, what's gonna be, ain't Vahoya the Lashon Simcha. Why? Because what's gonna be hasn't happened yet. And what hasn't happened yet has so much promise. What was, as good as it was, whatever it is, it's limited. Says the Rebbe, no. Elul not only affects that the good next year should be good, but it affects the year that passed. The Rebbe explains. In as much as the last year is concerned. It's about the past, and we all know that in time you can only travel in one direction, right? In space, you can travel in two directions. You can go forward and you can go backwards. In time, you can only travel in one direction. They call it the arrow of time. It's one of the strange limitations of our sense of the reality of the world, that you can only go in one direction and at a constant speed. The physicists, the Chachomim, are trying to talk about changing that, and they have all kinds of theories that in theory it could be different, but the fact is that time is different than space. You can only go one way. Says the Rebbe, it's not so true, not so simple. You can go backwards. How? If it's in the past, it's gone. So the Rebbe says, Nitase. Hine. The koyach, the power, the energy, the strength of tshuva is such that Nasan Balabai is Gamala over. A person becomes a Balabai even though it's past. I heard recently from Esti that the Rebbe said that if a person, Rahman al-San, did not keep Taras HaMishpach and goes to the mikveh once, it has a favorable effect on the children that were born before. The Rebbe said that. Amazing. I think that when the Rebbe said that, when the Rebbe said it, he created. Reb Shmuel Flagzon was a big chassid. His name was Reb Shmuel Levitten. Reb Shmuel Levitten used to say, ich vergesse, wenn ich habe es gehört, aber es passt für them. Maybe from Reb Saul Labkowski soll gesund sein. Reb Shmuel said, what's the difference between a guter Ried and a Rebbe? I'll explain in English. A guter is was wird sein, sagt A Rebbe, was sagt wird sein. In English it says, a tzaddik tells you what's going to happen tomorrow. A Rebbe, what he says happens. There's a very big difference between telling you what's going to happen tomorrow and saying what's going to happen tomorrow. It means the Rebbe is saying, not only can I tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, I can tell you what happened yesterday. That's the koyach. Says the Rebbe, Hine bekeach hatshuv. Through the power of tshuva, nasan balabayis gamala ova, we become masters over our past. V'zuhi mailas by li'tshuva l'gabei tzadikim gemurim. Of course, this is a Gemara, and it's a Rambam, and it's a Zoyar, right? That this is what's special about tshuva that places them even higher than a tzaddik. And you know that first of all, in the Gemara there's two opinions. In the Gemara there's two opinions: what's higher, a tzaddik or a bal tshuva. The Rambam, a bal nigler, paskins that the bal tshuva is higher than a tzaddik, and of course the Zoyar certainly paskins like that, and Chassidus also certainly paskins like that, and so on. But the Rambam has a different girsa than the Gemara that we have. In our printed Gemara, it says, "B'mokam shabal tshuva eindim tzadikim gemurim einam eindim." That where about tshuva stands, the tzaddik doesn't stand. The Rambam's girsa, we assume that the Rambam had a different girsa in his Shas, a different version of the Gemara. It said, "B'mokam shabal tshuva eindim tzadikim gemurim einam yochelim lamed." Not where a Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik doesn't stand, a tzaddik cannot stand. Cannot stand, kenisht. He cannot stand. A perfect tzaddik is a master over the present and the future. But what happened, it's past. But there's a special service which is called the work of tshuva. The work of tshuva makes one a master over what was, over the past, over yesterday. Tshuva, right? Now, of course, you know that this is called tshuva law, higher tshuva. I learn a Sicha, I have a minig, that Yom Kippur, Yom Kippur and I learn the same Sicha every year. It's a very lomdish Sicha. It's a Sima Masechta Yuma. I think it's a Chalak Zayin. I have a Chavrusa. After whatever it is, before Tillim, after Tillim, middle Tillim, we learn the same Sicha. It's a Nigladik Sicha. It's based on a Rogid Shavar. It's based on a Rogid Shavar. And the Rebbe says that there's 3 tshuvas, not 2. One tshuva is that Zdeinis Nas Leikish Gogas. That Navedi you did on purpose is like a Navedi you did by mistake. The second tshuva is that the Zdeinis are bottled, that the sins are gone. And the third madrega is the Zdeinis Nas Lekizochi, is that the Avedi becomes a mitzvah. Normally we think of 2 levels. In this Sicha, and he brings Rayas from Gemara and so on, that there's 3 tshuvas. There's a tshuva that makes that it's not like he did it on purpose, it's like he did it b'shoigig, by mistake. The second tshuva is that the Avedi is erased. And the third tshuva is that the Avedi becomes a mitzvah. This is a koyach literally of turning back the clock. Now you should know that there's a lot of examples of this in halacha, and of course the Rebbe brings all these ideas, and he brings them Kedarkei B'Kodesh from the Rebbe's favorite source, from the Rogid Shavar. And I'll give you 2 examples. The first example is explicit. You would have it in the Gemara, and the second example is the Rogid Shavar explaining it. And of course, I never looked at Rogid Shavar. It's look at the Sichas. A person makes a neder, makes a vow, right? What does he mean to make a vow? You take something which is mutter, which is allowed, and you say koinim. This is to be like a korban. Why? Because what's unique about a korban? That I get to make a korban. Tefillin the Eibush made. Hashem gave me a mitzvah to put on tefillin. I have a chiyuv to put on tefillin. So I have a chiyuv to make tefillin. There's no such thing as saying, I'm going to create the mitzvah of tefillin. The Eibush made it. But I take a behem and I say, this is going to be a korban. I just made it kaddish. A minute before it wasn't kaddish. A minute after I made it kaddish. And of course you have what's called kedushas haguf and kedushas momen. You have kaddish for the Beis Hamikdash. You have kaddish for the kohanim. You have kaddish for the bedek habayis. There's different types of. When you donate money to a shul, you make a pledge to a shul. It's some form of hektish. Right? That's why it says in certain svarim that if you're involved in a bidding for an aliyah and you lose, you should give the money anyway, because b'diba the money already became holy, and al pi halacha lo yachal dvari. When it comes to kedusha, words are like actions. Anyway, so the pasuk says that you can make a neder. That you take anything in the world, you say this is like a korban. Just like when it comes to a korban, my mouth has the power to change something from choil to kodesh. I can make something choil to kodesh like I did myself. I'm not eating this food. Or this food to me is like a korban. That's how you're supposed to say it. The Rebbe halachas on the Dorim Meshua side, they're complicated halachas, and it's not for now, and so on. What do? You're stuck. You're stuck. So how do you get out of it? So there's 2 ways to get out of it. One is called haforas nedorim, and the other is the one that we recognize is called hatoras nedorim. What's the difference between haforas nedorim and hatoras nedorim? Hafara means to break a vow. Hatara means to untie a vow. Hafaras Nedara means a person makes a neder. And certain people, under certain conditions, a father or a husband, has a right to be meifir, to break the nedarim of his daughter or naira and so on. But if a girl makes a neder, and her father was meifir the neder, and between the time she made the neder and the time that her father was meifir the neder, it can't be more than 24 hours. It'll be one day. She was avid on the neder. She didn't have avid. She had a korban. Why? Because her father's hafara is mikan alaba. The neder is no longer. Between the time she made the neder and when her father released her from broke the neder, she was mechuyev in the neder. And when her father breaks the neder is no more, but it was. And if in the intermittent time she was avid on the neder, she has to, whatever the halachas are, if you're avid on the neder, being a korban, But the Chachamim added a new thing. It's halacha l'meishim yisin. It's not in the Chumash, called hataras nedarim. Hataras means you untie. Untying the neder means the neder never was. A person makes a neder, and you go to a Chacham, and there's something called Pesach. You can't just be mat neder. You have to have a pretense. The Chacham will say to the neder, if you knew that the neder would mean such and such, would you have made the neder? And the person says no. So that's called the Sicha. He has to find a pischin peh, an excuse, and it can be matter the neder. Mahatoras nedarim is mafreya. So if a person makes a neder, and he was over the neder, and then he was matter neder, so whatever it is, on certain levels, there's still it wasn't good, but you don't mean a why? Because it was like you never made it. This is nigle, and it's nafkimin la'alocha. At mukadesh asli al manas she'ein alacha nedarim. A man marries a woman, and the condition that she has no nedarim, and she goes to a chacham and she's mata neder. She's mukadeshes. When he was makadesh, she had nedarim, but the ataras nedarim made that she never had the nedarim. You understand? You're not sick, and she goes to the doctor and she's healed. She's not mukadeshes. Why? Because the healing is only going forward; it's not going backwards. So there's practical differences. In other words, it's not just tshuva that has a property of turning back the clock. There's another example for it in Torah where you can turn back. A person is matir neder, so yesterday the neder didn't happen. Then the Rogatchover continues, and he says that just like we have the difference between hafadas nedarim and hataras nedarim, we have it lagabi refuah, medicine. And that, again, I know this from the Sichas, that the Rogatchover writes that there's two types of medicine. There's the type of medicine that the doctors know today. The type of medicine the doctors know today heals you that you're not sick anymore. But it doesn't heal you that you were never sick in the past. There is a different type of refuah, says the Rogatchover, which makes you heal in such a way that you were never sick in the first place. And that's a mashal. The first kind of healing is a mashal for hafaras nadarim, breaking a neder. And the second kind of refuah is a mashal for ataras nadarim, untying it. And of course, I always tell you this story. I don't have time to be maidech in the story, but the story is a maisa pile ploim. I heard this story from Rabbi Fuchs, all over Shalom, that in Atvast there was a boichin, a mashgiach, a sheshiva. His name was a Berel Garfinkel, Berel Kurnitzer. He had tuberculosis, so he never got married because he was a time bomb. And he has a dream. He sees the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says to him, "Amay mechsidus, refoina d'Hashem ve'irafe." So he mentions this to the Frierdiker Rebbe's oldest daughter. Her name was Chana Garari. That he saw her father, and that the Rebbe said a maimer, and he tells her, and I remember it. She goes back to the Frierdiker Rebbe and tells the Frierdiker Rebbe that Berel at Mirgezok, Berel told me that he saw you, and you said for him a maimer, refoina d'Hashem ve'irafe. So the Frierdiker Rebbe asks him, "Erhod the maimer?" He remembers the maimer. So the Rebbe, so she said, "Erhod the maimer." He remembers it. So the Frierdiker says, "Eibazei." So again, Nocham some doctor. If he remembers the maimer, he should go to the doctor again. He went to the doctor again, and the tuberculosis was gone. Gone. The doctors couldn't believe it. So they took out the old X-rays, and it was gone from the old X-rays. It was gone from the old X-rays. He was never sick. I never knew he was sick. In other words, this is a maise. The Rebbe says maise rab, a maise bepoil mamish. It's a maise pilleploim. It's an unbelievable story. Yeah, the point is, this is what Chassidus explains as a hagdama to explaining tshuva. This tshuva where the aveda that I did is no longer a disturbance to me, no longer a pagam as it's called. And then there's a tshuva, I never did it. I did it. The koyach tshuva, like the koyach of ataras nedarim, turns back the clock. I was never sick. The Rebbe says that tzaddik ken das nicht. Tzaddikim are perfect, but their balabatishkeit, their mastery, relates to the present, to the future, not to the past. About tshuva is different. I'm just going to read one more paragraph and then I'm going to stop. We'll continue tomorrow. The second to the last paragraph, 287. The mastery, the ownership of the Baal Tshuva over his past is not he improves it a little bit, it's all good. It isn't only that the evil is removed. that your sin is removed, and your Ovid means an Aveda you do on purpose. Chet means an Aveda you do by mistake. So you have to take away the Zodin. And then you have to wipe clean the Shege. The bad actually becomes good. Like the famous expression in the Gemara is, Deinis Naslik Ezochias, the Avedas become mitzvahs. Okay, and of course the Rebbe finishes by saying, the truth is, the Avedas that become mitzvahs are higher than regular mitzvahs. And we'll continue tomorrow.